Hello, Wizards and Muggles. We are taking a break this week because of the Memorial Day holiday in the United States. However, we wanted to give you a taste of one of our favorite features on Apple Podcasts and our Patreon, Bonus MuggleCast. Twice a month, we record bonus MuggleCast installments in which we discuss all things fandom, including our favorite headcanons, recent Wizarding World news items, and a lot more. We have a lot of fun recording these, and in this installment from March, we discuss a major piece from the Wall Street Journal that shows the relationship between J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers. There are quite a few interesting tidbits that we thought were worth discussing and gossiping about. That's another fun part of Bonus MuggleCast. So please enjoy, and if you don't already, we would really appreciate your support at patreon.com/MuggleCast or by signing up for the MuggleCast Gold subscription on Apple Podcasts. We're an independent podcast. We love doing the show, but we need support from listeners like you. Listener support is the only reason we have been able to run for 19 years and counting. We are so honored to be a listener-supported podcast, so thank you so much for your support, and we hope you enjoy this installment of Bonus MuggleCast. We'll be back next week with a new chapter-by-chapter episode. This is Bonus MuggleCast. We're riding high on a great episode with Kiera. Wow, that was a great time, wasn't it, y'all?
Oh yeah.
Agreed.
She was great.
She was awesome.
So, all right. Wow, this piece that we're going to talk about today came out on a Saturday. I stopped what I was doing to read this because it's so rare that we get a look at the relationship between J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers. But this was the focus of a new piece from the Wall Street Journal. And it was impressive in part because it's always been, that relationship has always been hidden away from public view, which honestly has been very impressive because if you look at Disney and Marvel and Lucasfilm, there's quite often reporting on drama amongst creative teams at these various studios. But Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling, we never hear about their tussles. Maybe that's because there haven't been tussles? No, not so much. I just think they have it locked down a lot better than some of these other studios do.
Yeah.
But this piece from the Wall Street Journal is very long. And I started to try and summarize it, but I just couldn't. So we're just going to read passages from it and discuss. We'll start with
let's talk about the headline. It's an attention-grabbing headline.
Yes, the headline is, "Can Warner Brothers uncancel J.K. Rowling?" So the subject of this piece is like, J.K. Rowling has faced a lot of backlash. She's been canceled. Can they uncancel J.K. Rowling? And I guess by extension, solidify the future of Harry Potter. Right. Preserve
the profits, I think, is really what it's about. It is about Warner Brothers and its CEO, David Zaslav, struggling to keep a firm grip on a profitable series and to continue to make decisions that continue to make money indefinitely.
Yeah,
is kind of my read on it.
I mean, I think the headline is just that. It's a headline. I don't really know how much relevance it has to the actual article. I didn't read the entire article, but from the clips that you shared, Andrew, it doesn't seem like it went too deep into
uncanceling
her. Yeah, like it references her transphobia and her ongoing situation with the trans community, but I don't think this article is about whether or not Warner Brothers can successfully or unsuccessfully cancel or uncancel J.K. Rowling. Like it's about about the future of the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah,
but that's almost the same thing. If we're really thinking about it,
no, it's not.
Well, it is because we're talking about the CEO securing J.K. Rowling's investment. As the article will continue to talk about, it's about Warner Brothers having to smooth over a relationship that was set off and made problematic for the first time in recent years. And so the only way they have, an agreement there, a working relationship, is if Warner Brothers concedes to the type of behavior that got J.K. Rowling canceled. That's how the whole article is about that.
Yeah. I mean, she's also not canceled. Like, it kind of drives me nuts when people say J.K. Rowling's canceled, because it's like, she is top 1%. She's rich as hell. She lives in a gated home, which I completely understand why. Like, she is someone who will never want for anything again in her life.
Yeah.
Nobody's taking away her Twitter account.
Clearly.
Like, nobody's.
Well, and she hasn't been. Part of cancellation is deplatforming. She's still got all of her platforms. And in fact, and not only that, but she has this CEO of Warner Brothers knocking on her door, begging her to take them back. It was a really interesting kind of a thing.
And Harry Potter Inc.'s bottom line hasn't suffered. We'll read a passage about that in this article. So she hasn't been canceled in that way either. People want her to be canceled. People have issues with her that are valid, but she hasn't been canceled. This is like a clickbaity headline written by an editor.
Yeah.
I do agree the headline is, clickbaity, but I think the article really does talk about that relationship between J.K. Rowling and her fans, J.K. Rowling and her previous, the actors who were all in the movies originally, and trying to secure a future largely without them. And that's the thing that's so interesting about this article to me. To Andrew, to your point, it talked about the disastrous relationship or the difficult relationship Rowling now has with the actors, especially the trio, and how that got all messed up, and how you can't rely on the new or like the old stuff to be able to continue to print money.
Yeah.
In true MuggleCast form, we're analyzing how it was written.
For sure.
One of the more fascinating things that I learned from the article is that really the only thing that WB has full control over is the original series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And technically, they didn't have to go to her for this TV reboot. They made the decision to do that so that the relationship between them stays somewhat smooth. So I didn't know that.
Me neither. That was a big revelation in this piece. And I think they want to work with J.K. Rowling because A, she can promote it if she's working with them. She'll be more inclined to promote a TV project. And B, they'll be able to go to her for questions and whatnot about story arcs and characters and all that. So
it's just such an interesting choice for Warner Brothers to make. Wouldn't you agree? Like, we're in the midst of quite a political and cultural movement, and the CEO is booking this jet to go and knock on J.K. Rowling's door and beg her to love them. For me, that's quite controversial of a choice.
Isn't part of it that because they can only adapt the core story without J.K. Rowling theoretically, if they want to do any kind of spin-off series, they kind of need her, right? She has veto power over that kind of thing contractually.
Yeah.
So if they're wanting to do any kind of spin-offs, like we've talked about them really needing to do to bring the wizarding world into the next phase of, virality, they can't do it without her.
Right.
So the money is basically saying, the money and the longevity of the franchise is saying, your ideology be damned. You have no choice but to have a healthy relationship with the creator of this world. I think if WB had no aspirations to take it outside of the core story, and if they just wanted to readapt the 7 books and not stray outside of that, and they wanted to forever live in Harry's 7 years or 6 years at Hogwarts plus the year-long camping trip, they would do that.
Again and again.
Yeah. But that's not what they want. They want to grow the franchise.
This relates to what one of the areas we're going to talk about. And I think it's important to kind of overlay a lot of what we're going to be discussing, because we often do get into a lot of how her views have impacted the fandom. But WB did a survey of the global fan base in terms of how the author's views might impact her overall profitability. And the reality is it didn't really make a dent.
Right.
So I think that goes to show you that while we're invested at a different level, that's just the reality of it. Doesn't make it right what she did and what she says, but it's clear that on a much larger scale, unfortunately, it's not going to make all that much of a difference to the people who are consuming the Harry Potter franchise.
And we can revisit this point once we get to that passage, because I do have a thought or two on that. But so this piece opens up with a little context. It was early 2022, and J.K. Rowling had avoided executives at WB for more than 2 years. This was also less than a year into David Zaslav's tenure as the new head of Warner. I can't even keep track. Discovery Warner, Time Warner Discovery, whatever the hell it's called now. Warner Brothers.
Yes, Max.
Max. Let's just call it Max. So when David Zaslav had taken over as the CEO, an associate told him to get on a plane to the UK if he wanted a chance at winning over the writer who controlled his company's most valuable property. Sitting across the table from one another at a London supper club soon after, Rowling and Zaslav spent 4 hours discussing their childhoods, their families, how they weathered COVID, and Zaslav wanted to breathe new life into the Harry Potter franchise, seeing a new TV show as a potential tentpole in his streaming strategy. But he needed to use a light touch. This was about salvaging a relationship so complicated and emotional that many have described it not as a business partnership, but as a marriage. So we're just going to read through some passages here. Like I said, it was so much to summarize. Here's one passage. She is the last member of what was known internally at one time as Warner's A-plus talent crew, a group that included only 2 other members, Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg. But now Eastwood is 93 years old, and Spielberg made his last 2 movies at other studios. Rowling appears to be the last one left. So we see how valuable Rowling is to Warner Brothers at this point.
Yeah.
Another passage. When Kevin Sugihara took over as head of the Warner Studio in 2013, he saw a franchise collecting dust, that being Harry Potter, and had a challenge. What came next? Rowling had distanced herself from the studio, and Sugihara flew to Scotland, where she lives, to reset the relationship. And just a pause, we've spoken about that before. Rowling has credited him with being the reason for why Fantastic Beasts came to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on the collecting dust? Deathly Hallows Part 2 came out in 2011.
But they didn't have anything new.
2013 is collecting
this is
dust.
business speak. Collecting dust. Oh, you haven't made $300 billion in the last 2 years? That's dusty. You got to dust that off.
They had no projects in the pipeline. It was collecting dust.
Well, okay, but in fairness, though, shouldn't they then have started planning before the last movie came out? And maybe they did.
Or wanted to, and Rowling was like, meh.
Yeah.
So out of the rapprochement came an agreement to produce a new film series titled Fantastic Beasts. Rowling, who had not adapted the Harry Potter books for the screen, wanted to write the Fantastic Beasts screenplays herself. Sugihara accelerated efforts to build a franchise team crossing film, consumer products, live attractions, and other divisions, with one leader based in LA and another, per Rowling's request, based in London. A new enthusiasm infused the effort. Executives studied long-standing franchises to understand how a brand could become an always-on property. So they wanted to really reboot Harry Potter. They wanted to make it like Star Wars. And we've talked about this before. We could see Harry Potter being a new Star Wars in that there's not just theme parks, but multiple TV shows, multiple movie franchises. Like there's a lot of opportunity with Harry Potter.
Yeah, that term always on franchise, like with the example of Star Wars and what Star Wars has done on Disney Plus with television, not to mention when that was simultaneous with some of the movies coming out. That's an example of an always on franchise, right? You know, and with the theme parks, like you're saying, like every day there's something happening for that franchise, and there's new material that literally there's so much material that the television series they do a full season, and then there's like a 2-week break before the very next season comes out of a different show, and they're in rotation. And it's just like, it's actually amazing what that franchise has accomplished and how much money it must, be making for Disney in Star Wars. So it's natural that Warner Brothers would want something like that.
Well, speaking of Star Wars, and this is the last passage I'll read. I'll have the other ones read by y'all because this one's long. George Lucas had allowed writers to expand the Star Wars universe with novels and TV series years after he had finished directing the films. Jurassic Park and Batman have been revisited by different writers and directors time and again. Harry Potter, by contrast, had a creator who didn't want to lose any control. No detail was too small. At one point, Rowling wrote executives to ask about the chocolate used to make chocolate frogs, a sweet featured in the books that fans could buy at the parks. Why, she asked, was it not sourced fair trade? The incremental requests added up to significant contractual changes, turning a once lopsided deal into one that granted her more rights and revenue as her stature grew. The new perks range from a bigger cut of merchandise sales to an understanding her team has influence over who on the Warner Brothers side manages the franchise. Supporters say Rowling's restraint has served her creation well. Harry Potter over the years avoided the franchise fatigue that would befall marquee Hollywood properties like Marvel and Star Wars, which lost some fans amid a glut of film and TV programming. And I'll pause here to say, that's true. Like, creatively, Harry Potter's been pretty tight, and it hasn't suffered because they haven't launched a bunch of different spin-offs and just threw shit at the wall to see what stuck. Like, Marvel's gone crazy with projects, and they've suffered for it. Rowling's Iron Fist has benefited the Harry Potter series. Now, of course, there's been some stumbles, but far less than Star Wars and Marvel have had.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, she's been very, very intentional. Not just her, but everybody that has worked on this film franchise. Since day one, it's been very clear that things were under a tight lid, right? Like, even going back to the original trio and the casting of the entire franchise, only British, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a mandate from J.K. Rowling, and it happened, right? The way that the kid, like, by and large, there was not a scandal to be seen on around any of these child actors throughout the course of that's like unheard of.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think it extends beyond just controlling the story. I think she had her hands in a lot of other things as well.
And I think too, it's definitely something that we have to massively credit her and WB and the whole franchise for. But I will say the downside of that is they don't take too many risks. And I think because they don't take too many creative risks, there are a lot of ways in which the content we do have doesn't really always check the box. I mean, think about some of the choices that were made creatively with the movies that we all criticize. There was a lot of hesitancy to stray away from a very specific tone in the movies, even when they got darker, even when the stories got darker. And because of that, there are some really interesting facets of the Harry Potter world that are never considered on screen. And I think that same reluctance to allow other creative people into the space, to give them room in the sandbox, I think it ultimately robs the franchise of the ability to expand.
Mm-hmm.
That's my critique of it. I have long felt that Harry Potter needs to take a leaf out of the Star Wars or the Marvel book.
Mm-hmm.
But what they should learn from those franchises is that if you try to do too much and it's shitty, it's not going to keep printing money for you just because it's branded Harry Potter. It has to be good.
You got to keep the fans happy.
Yes.
Well, and if you think about how hard Warner Brothers tried to keep the fans happy in Fantastic Beasts, but based on what they thought, would really work in continuing to tie in the main Harry Potter series,
Right.
Down
By
to
movie 3, that was their strategy. Hogwarts.
Dumbledore in the title, the Hedwig's theme playing. You did not hear the Hedwig's theme anywhere in the first movie.
Mm-mm.
And it's one of the best ones.
It is the best one of those movies. I loved the first movie.
All right, I like the discussion, but we have so much to get through. We'll keep moving here.
Okay.
As Warner worked on Harry Potter's next phase, executives had to rely on Blair, Rowling's business partner, as the key liaison. He updated her on the studio's ideas and pitches about once a month, visiting her home in Scotland, but Warner executives often felt left in the dark about what details he presented to her. Most direct FaceTime with Rowling came at more infrequent Ministry of Magic meetings. That's what they were called. That's fun. Held in London and New York. Warner employees would spend weeks preparing. Inside the meetings, Rowling was often approachable and focused. One attendee noted that she never looked at her phone. But when things grew heated over a contractual point or storytelling disagreement, the mood could get combustible. Screaming matches, threats of boycotts, tears. Rowling often attached her personal history to the business at hand. At times, she referred to her past as an abused woman, saying a group of men telling her what to do reminded her of her previous marriage, during which she has said her husband, Jorge Orantes, barred her from having her own house key and searched her handbag when she returned from trips out. At other times, she invoked her time as a single mother, saying the characters under debate were like her children. Warner executives, certainly sympathetic to her story, didn't know quite how to respond and treated her as a de facto decider of matters large and small, even if contractually they didn't have to. So that's a very interesting and personal look at how she's conducted business behind the scenes and how Warner has handled it.
I'm shocked about how much detail there is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet she's not happy. and maybe Warner Brothers isn't either. So then they get into, as Micah touched on, the backlash around her thoughts on trans people.
Each time a new Rowling tweet about trans issues appeared, the Potter managers at Warner Brothers tried to work through their disappointment. Some agreed with her, others didn't, but Rowling's remarks threatened to drag an unimpeachable brand into a political maelstrom. Executives began surveying the global fan base to anticipate how the author's views might dent sales. The answer? Not much. For the most part, Rowling's statements had affected some people's opinions of her, for good or ill, without having a material impact on the Harry Potter brand or business. So kind of like Micah mentioned before.
Yeah. And to follow up on his points, I think we, as hardcore Harry Potter fans, living and breathing the Harry Potter fandom every day and week, we're in this certain bubble where we see all of the backlash around J.K. Rowling's tweets, and we see her tweeting to begin with. But outside that bubble, and I like to look at my literal next door neighbors as an example, or my sister, who's a teacher with 3 kids. They're not on Twitter. They're not consumed with the internet and the Harry Potter fandom every week. They're living their lives as casual Harry Potter fans. These guys next door, they love going to the theme parks. They love playing Hogwarts Legacy. They don't follow what's going on online. That's why sales haven't been impacted. There's millions of people like my neighbors and my family members who don't pay attention to any of that. They just enjoy Harry Potter for what it is.
Yeah. It's so tough because, it's one of those things where I feel like when she initially did it, it clearly was a major mainstream news story. But the reality is that she continues to behave this way on social media, and she does it with such frequency. Like literally, I saw things in my feed yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be news every time. And because it's not going to have that same level of impact. Sure, it's going to come up anytime there's a major Harry Potter news story. They're going to talk about sort of the embroiled author and her views, but it's just going to be a passing statement. And like, it's tough. Like being in this, having these conversations are tough because we want to be supportive of the entire Harry Potter fan community. But at the same time, what we're talking about will always tie back to her. There's no way to separate Harry Potter from her, in my opinion. You can't do it. She's the creator, and it sucks.
Well,
Yeah. It really does. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but I mean, speaking for myself, she was like my childhood hero.
Oh, same.
Personal hero of mine. I wanted to be her when I grew up. And so much of that was, not just this wonderful book series that she gave to us all, but it was how she carried herself and how she treated her fans, especially children, that really resonated with me. So for her to take this particular stance on trans people just felt so out of character and kind of felt, I don't know, almost like it could have been a really bad clickbait article or something that took something out of context. Unfortunately, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's really hard as a lifelong fan and as people who are that invested in Harry Potter as we are.
Yeah. The way I see it is that the story is hers. The community that has been built around that story is ours.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to kind of
She didn't build the community.
Yep.
move forward.
No.
Right.
No, and in fact, we have often credited MuggleNet, MuggleCast, and stuff like we're like, because we're talking about ourselves, but for keeping the conversations going between books and keeping the fans, engaged. We were fans. We were the group that we were, primarily writing for or speaking to, but the fandom is that of the fans.
People like
That is
Kiara
100%
who
right.
are reminding people what it was like to read the Harry Potter books for the first time.
Yeah.
It's just wild because before we move on too, like I will say, like all of the ways in which J.K. Rowling has fallen from being like a childhood hero, like Laura was saying, she's now often bragging about how sales haven't took a hit. And the most recent tweet I saw from her is this librarian put the books backwards in the shelf so that they would sell a little less often because he said, I can't deal with the transphobia. And she's like, oh, that's me done then. And she's like baiting people. This controversy has really changed her and definitely the way in which she interacts with people now, regardless of context, is far different than how it was in the golden era. And she is just not my hero, not even a little bit anymore. And not even, I would say, an inspiring person at the end of the day. I mean, she inspired me for a time, but it's difficult now.
The ego and the snark talking about like that tweet that you just read, like, it's like, why? You're one of the most richest, successful people on the planet and you need to feud with a librarian? Like,
Yeah.
that hurts your feelings or something? Like, get offline. You're spending too much time online and reading Twitter.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
you didn't like, I mean, I would have to go back and look, but I don't think there was that same level of animosity when people were burning her books.
Good point.
Or taking them off
Right.
shelves. Like in, who was the
Yeah.
Laura Mallory, right? In
Yeah.
your beautiful state of Georgia, Laura.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think she's still here too.
So
She's not the type to
You
leave.
guys hanging out after the
continuing
show.
on, in June 2020, as the controversy reached a high pitch, Warner issued a statement, and we'll skip over the statement. And Rowling wanted a stronger showing of support, but studio leaders felt they could not offer one without angering employees or other creative partners, such as the Wachowski sisters, who are trans women, behind Warner's Matrix series. Yeah.
This is the pickle, right? Is if we align ourselves too closely to J.K. Rowling, then we alienate some of our other big money makers like the Wachowskis, who are themselves trans. And here's the thing. This article's reporting that Rowling was upset with Warner's show of support is ridiculous, is preposterous, because as I remember that statement, it was really non-committal to, it was something like way different. Like, we love Harry Potter. That's basically the pure summary of what Warner Brothers said. So I don't see how it could have been more supportive of her.
Yeah, it was very down the middle. Like, it wasn't like we disagree with Rowling. It certainly wasn't anything like that.
Yeah.
So then there's passages about the Harry Potter reunion that was on Max, which Rowling said she didn't want to partake in, which was great news for WB because they were sweating how to include her when the actors were speaking out against her. So they avoided any controversy there, luckily, just because she didn't want to be involved. Now, picking up the article again. While Rowling's relations with the Harry Potter actors frayed, Warner executives continued to pursue what had become a years-long quest, getting a Harry Potter TV show made. Franchise executives tried to get creative, at one point pitching her team on a stop-motion animation version of Harry Potter.
Hey.
So that's a revelation from this article. Warner execs watched in frustration as competing streaming services took off and established franchises such as Star Wars and DC Comics became treasure maps full of potential shows. Around 3 years ago, before Zaslav took over, the studio approached TV writers and asked them to brainstorm ideas in the Harry Potter universe. A prequel about the generation of wizards that included Harry's parents was one idea. A look at a different school for young wizards was another. The ideas weren't presented to Rowling. Warner execs knew she had the right to kill the projects should she choose to do so. That veto power stemmed from Rowling's request in the early 2000s to grant her authority over non-author written sequels, legalese for the kind of prequels and spin-offs that the studio wanted to explore with writers other than Rowling. So there's some pretty big revelations just in that paragraph alone. They thought about a prequel about the wizards that included Harry's parents. I'm thinking Marauders, like that has to be the Marauders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
A look at a different school for young wizards was another. Nobody would have wanted that.
I want Haley Joel Osment as the headmaster for that American wizarding
for
school.
Ilvermorny.
Yeah.
But then we got this revelation that Micah referenced earlier, that she has authority to veto non-author written sequels. So basically anything other than the core Harry Potter series.
Right. Which is going to probably handcuff Warner Brothers for a long time. And like beyond, based on the next paragraph too, like depending on who this person is that's going to have the control to veto in the future.
Yeah.
Right. So when Rowling passes, it's going to be essentially bequeathed to somebody else that presumably is going to share a similar viewpoint to her.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well,
I would think.
who will want to protect the franchise and the legacy and the brand.
Yeah. Sorry. When I say
stuff,
viewpoint,
yeah.
I'm not talking about in relation to the trans community. I'm talking about her position on having veto power as it relates to non-author written sequels. I think that, I don't know, is that good for the future of this franchise?
Well,
it depends. Like, what if this person ends up being somebody who's like, yeah, I care about, the Harry Potter legacy, but I also care about making a lot of money.
yeah, and they might have a more flexible approach to how to manage Harry Potter Inc. than Rowling does. Maybe this person over time will become convinced to create more spin-offs or something. I don't think it has to.
Yeah.
I don't think they necessarily are going to follow Rowling's current intentions and wants and needs to a T. Like, they could eventually be persuaded by Warner Brothers or somebody else to come up with great stories.
Yeah, but it's her series at the end of the day, and I understand her desire to continue to exert a level of control over it. It's only natural. But this is going a step beyond. I mean, she's doing what she thinks is in the best interest of the franchise in protecting it in this way, in this literary trust that is going to have control once she is no longer here.
Well, as much as it is controlling, it's also just so revolutionary. It's a sign of how big Harry Potter was and how badly Warner Brothers wanted it, that they ever agreed to this type of restrictive, creative control rests with the author outside of the 7 books. Like, that's amazing and possibly unique, definitely, for how important Harry Potter has been and how big it is. That's huge that she's retained that amount of creative control, for better or for worse.
Continuing on, a Potter series would be costly, but could prove a major subscriber draw. Zaslav soon concluded, however, that the only Potter show Warner could legally pursue without Rowling's permission was one that stuck to the stories of the original 7 books, since those were firmly in the studio's control and not the kind of prequel or spin-off she had clawed back the rights to years earlier. When Zaslav met with Rowling following her months of anger towards Warner Brothers, he knew he was on strong footing to create a TV remake of the books, but he still wanted her on board. It's just not a great creative move to have the architect unhappy, said WB exec Casey Blois. Months of talks followed as Zaslav spoke to Rowling directly. The studio pitched Rowling on the big budget treatment that TV can afford now, in a market where per episode costs routinely exceed $20 million. There was also the chance, through a show likely to premiere more than 20 years after the first movie, to use the series to hook younger audiences on the Wizarding World, which Rowling probably liked because, that leads to book sales and all that. The new series will bring to the screen subplots and tertiary characters who didn't make the cut in the 8 movies. A single season may cost up to, are you sitting down, $250 million. a reflection of the kind of cinematic, high-budget production now expected by fans in TV's prestige era. So that's interesting. Apparently, they found out they're looking to spend $250 million per season. And
they're going to have house elves. They're going to have Peeves. They're going to have Peeves everywhere.
Peeves everywhere. We've got money to burn. Let's put him wherever we can.
He's always in the background of every
paying
shot.
For him, right? He might as well show up everywhere.
That's true. That's an interesting point.
Another line here, behind the thawing relations, executives say, is a shift in the studio's approach, one that seeks to avoid alienating the Rowling camp without automatically ceding power to it either. Woof, that sounds tough.
Good luck with that.
That's what I find. Yeah, I mean, that's what I find to be the most fascinating kind of dynamic about this entire story is this relationship that exists between Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling.
Right.
Like, it's just, to me, it's fascinating to read about.
It is.
They are just like joined at the hip with her, essentially.
A marriage, as was described at the top of this piece. Micah, you want to read this next part?
Whether they like it or not.
Sure. Another lucrative part of the franchise is the blockbuster Hogwarts Legacy video game, the best-selling title of 2023 with more than 24 million copies sold, generating more than $1 billion in revenue. The game's performance, especially coming after Rowling's tweets, reminded executives anew of the cash machine the author's creation remains. For years, Rowling eschewed some mobile game ideas, worried that her characters could be used in ways that might exploit children and get them to spend their parents' money without permission. But mobile games such as Magic Awakened, which allows players to roleplay as new Hogwarts students, eventually made it to market. The division overall has enjoyed greater flexibility than its film and TV counterparts.
Which is interesting that they can kind of do whatever they want. You think of not Hogwarts Legacy or Magic Awakened, but there's that other one. I can't remember. It's been out for a few years now.
Hogwarts Mystery?
Yeah. And that's adding all kinds of stuff to canon.
That was definitely adding to canon.
And now you go in the Harry Potter wiki and it keeps citing that game. I'm like, ew, no, stop. This isn't canon.
I know. It's
seriously,
not real.
It pisses me off.
Do you think this is because J.K. Rowling she's like a typical boomer and doesn't understand video games?
Oh my
maybe
God.
How big they are. Because video games kind of operate in this underground world. Like, people talk about them, but not a lot. They don't get as much attention online as other pop culture.
It is a real concern, the kids not spending their parents' money thing, like in-app purchases and stuff. Absolutely 100%. Like, that is valuable to guard against.
Yeah.
It's unclear how the video games got to be so diverse and, far spreading.
Well, speaking of video games.
Go ahead. Who wants to read this final little passage, which has a surprise in and of itself? This is how the article ends, basically.
Yeah. So here it says, a video game based on the Hogwarts game of Quidditch is among the next projects after engineers overcame an early snag. Building the game, they realized systems wouldn't run as smoothly if they featured 7 players on each Quidditch team, as portrayed in the book. Reducing the number of players on a team, though, contradicted Harry Potter lore, but Rowling allowed it. The game is now in development. Hang on.
So, it's hard
20 years ago.
Yeah, go ahead.
20 years ago, a Quidditch game was released. There were 7 players on each Quidditch team. Some were CGI. In fact, only one was not CGI, but they did it. Now, in 2024, there's some kind of issue with 7 players on a Quidditch team, and they needed special permission to reduce that number of players to 4.
5. But still.
5?
I think it said 5 in the article.
So just as somebody who has played a lot of sports video games over the years that isn't Quidditch, what I find surprising about this, though, is like if you're somebody who plays FIFA, right, there's 11 players on each team that are on the field. So there's 22 players on the field. Same for football, right? There's 11 players on offense, 11 players on defense. There's 22 players on the field, and it all seems to work just fine. So like why they aren't out there consulting with some of the biggest video game companies that have created these sports properties over the years shocks me. Like, you can't have 14 players and maybe like a referee zooming around on
Yeah.
brooms. Like what?
Oh, if that's a playable role, I want to be the referee.
And correction, Eric said 4, I said 5. It actually doesn't say how many players they've reduced it to. I don't know why I had in my head 5.
I thought it said
I
5.
thought it said 5 too.
Wild.
Did Peeves get in our doc? I'm looking at the article again. It doesn't mention any number, but neither does what I copy and pasted a few days ago.
I think the point stands. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's interesting if they're talking about maybe 7 people can't be online players. Okay, like maybe I can see that working, but then at least have the 4 positions of keeper, beater, chaser, and seeker
Right.
be available. Like your additional beater and the 2 other chasers don't need to be live people, but like they can absolutely just kind of float there and still be. Anyway, it
Do
seems
you think
like
it's because it's in the air? Is that where you think the issue is coming? Is
Well,
because
maybe
well, the way that they handled it with the EA game, the original Quidditch game, was that you couldn't go up or down. Like you were in the air, but you couldn't go above like the level that you were at, like the level of goals.
we're in such a modern time these days with games. I don't buy they can't figure this out. I will. One little caveat. We were talking about this in our Slug Club hangout, and somebody who play tested the game, because they have been doing play tests that you can sign up for, did say it was 7 players. So I don't know what exactly Wall Street Journal is talking about here. Perhaps it is another game based on Quidditch. Perhaps they just got it wrong. They haven't issued a correction.
It's the Hogwarts Legacy Quidditch update coming soon to Hogwarts Legacy to consoles.
well, maybe that's what came out of part of the testing was that the game wasn't operating smoothly with that many players,
Yeah.
and so they took
Oh.
it down from 7 to
That
6,
could
5.
be after Rowling signed off on it. It's going to be
Yeah.
weird if that's how
Right.
it ships. Maybe they'll figure it out at a later time. We don't even know when this game's coming out.
Yeah, they need to come up with a story. They just need a story reason for there not being 7 players on a team.
What
Yeah.
is that?
I don't to Micah's earlier point, I don't understand why they're not working with gaming developers who specialize in sports games.
I'm sure they are, though.
Because-
That's the weird part, right? Like they
Are
have,
they?
have to be. Not EA Sports, maybe, but maybe that was their first mistake, not working with a sport game label.
That's my feeling.
Okay.
And here's the thing though that I'll just say is like when you're playing football, American football, like all of those players are playable. Like you can select who on the defense, if you're on defense, you want to be. Like you want to be a safety, you want to be a lineman, doesn't matter. Same thing on offense. Well, offense usually is you're either the quarterback, the running back, the wide receiver, but even still, like you're still talking about 22 players that are playable. Like it seems something strange. Like, I don't know. Maybe maybe you can cast spells and do all other weird kinds of things while you're playing
that could be
Quidditch
cool.
that, they needed to cut down the number of people that were on the pitch.
Yeah,
Well, I
I'm
guess we'll
just
see.
I'm looking at the studio that's developing this. It's Unbroken Studios. And it's
Did they
not saying
unbreak their problem with
Bro-
7 players?
broken
No,
down.
I don't think so.
I will say it's clear that, unlike the original game, which was EA Games, whoever owns the rights to, this level of game or the people, these Unbroken Studios or whatever, they aren't the sports company anymore. And they want to keep making Harry Potter games. So the idea that they have to run with is make a Quidditch game. But of course, it's going to come with the caveat that so much of this, article in summary is like, we are the owners of this property along with J.K. Rowling, and here's why and here's how. How do we continue to print money that the series guarantees?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting walk through the most recent couple of years.
So that was the article. It did end on that Quidditch anecdote. Like we said, lots of interesting revelations. They were considering the stop motion series, a series about Harry's parents. There's clearly the J.K. Rowling Warner Brothers relationship is testy more often than not. But Rowling is focused at the meetings, and they're called Ministry of Magic meetings, which is very cute. But yeah, great piece. Check it out in the Wall Street Journal if you can
Can we get Kira back? Like, I need more energy after that discussion. It was just like,
yeah.
Go watch your TikToks. You'll be revved up.
That's what I'm going to do after the show before I go to bed. Like, just that was a deep conversation.
It was, but like I said, we rarely get glimpses inside this relationship. So the fact that this was reported is very interesting. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.